So thank you all for joining today. This is a session that Denis and I have been thinking for a while for organizing, and we thought that individuals that are new to the publishing or not so familiar with the publishing process might be able to gain something and maybe, hopefully, increase their chances of success. As you can imagine, we also would like to increase our chances of success. So this is a work in progress for all of us. So let me for a start just say a few words about me so you know me. I've been at Southampton for about a year and a half. I was at the University of Plymouth for about 12 years. I got my PhD in 2004 at Haifa University in Israel. I did a postdoc at UCLA and Max Planck, but in a reverse order. First, I was at the Max Planck, then at UCLA. I'm a professor in the business school, but I'm also, and this is who's organizing it, I have also a position at CHEP, the Center for Higher Education Practice, who's organizing this meeting. So just to give you a little bit about my editorial experience, I've been with the Journal of Behavioral and Experimental Economics since about 7 years, since 2013. It's mainly, as you can imagine, focused on behavioral and experimental economics. I deal with about 20 articles a year, sometimes more, sometimes less. Just to give you a sense of the journal, although the journal is not like the most highly ranked, we get about over 800 submissions. And the acceptance rate, just to give you a sense, is about 15%. So 15 articles out of 100 see the light of day, 85 are more or less sent back. I've also been a guest editor and consultant editor in judgment and decision making, health psychology, and health psychology review. And just so you know a bit about Denis, I would let him say a few words about himself.
Thanks, Yaniv. Just to give you a little bit of background information about me, I'm a cognitive psychologist and I'm at the School of Psychology in Southampton. I'm originally from Belgium, which is where I also did my PhD at Ghent University. I got my PhD in 2005. And then I spent a couple of years postdocing in good old days when we were allowed to travel, have been described as the modern nomads of the world. So you do spend a couple of years in ideal circumstances in other places on the planet. It's okay if you don't, but it's good if you can. So I spent 2 years at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, Massachusetts. And then I spent time at the University of Southampton as a visiting postdoc. And whilst I was a visiting postdoc, there was a job application to which I applied. And then I became a lecturer and then later on a associate professor in the School of Psychology. To say something about my editorial experience, I'm an associate editor for 2 journals. And I mention both of them because they're both quite different. So the first one is Behavior Research Methods. You can see from the way behavior is spelled that it's an American journal. I've been an associate editor there since January 2020, so I'm now in my 2nd year. It's a 4-year stretch. And there I deal with articles with a very specific focus, namely on methods, techniques, and instrumentation of research in behavioral research. Oh, I think somebody needs to put their thing on mute.
Please make sure you're on mute.
So it's a very specific focus, and it is it's not the top journal in cognitive psychology, but it is actually the top journal for instrumentation. So say, for instance, you program a library that is useful for analysis and you want to send it somewhere good, you will send it there. It's got a very specific way in which it deals with open access. So what it does is the first year of publication, it is not open access, but it's very flexible in allowing authors to post the last version on their website. And from that moment on, after a year, it's already completely open access. The reason why it adopts that position is because the journal is run by the Psychonomic Society. So it's run by scientists who put pressure on the editors to make it as quickly open access as possible. I deal with about 40 articles a year, which is a lot. And then the second journal I'm from is Psychologica Belgica, which you can hear already from the way it sounds that it's a more of a regional journal. It's fairly low impact. However, it is also completely open access. It's in Web of Science. I've been an associate editor there for 2014, and this is where I thought I was actually quite good. I think I wouldn't have gotten the associate editorship or been asked for it for behavior research methods if I didn't learn the ropes a little bit over a couple of years in another journal. All right, I'll hand it back to Jan. Oh, Jan, if we are okay if they ask questions during the talk, right?
Yes. So the way we're gonna do it, we're gonna move. We have a few slides. We hope to do it in as fast as we can to give you, this is an opportunity for you to ask us questions about the editorial process. Please do at any point, raise hand, send a chat, etc. I cannot see anything aside from the slide. So, and we're gonna alternate between, I speak, Denis speak, but we might interject. But really, this session is for you. It's not for us. It's an opportunity for you to ask any question. And if we spill over the hour, I'm happy to stay a bit longer. It's not a problem. There's no right or wrong question. I've done sessions like that before, and there are all sorts of how to deal with my supervisor, what to do about this, what to do about that. Feel free. We might not always have the best answer, but we are happy to accept the question and contemplate them. First and most important thing is, if you want to publish, you have to write. So this is the ABC for publishing. My role and Denis' role will be non-existent if you would not write. And there's no other way. Write, and as they say, writing is rewriting. So there's no alternative to that. I spoke to another colleague of mine, and she came up with the statement, the success rate depends really on submission rate. And as you saw, the journal that I am part of the editorial team has 85% rejection rate. And this is not uncommon. So you have to have many, in a sense, many papers as possible, in a way, in order for them to see the light of day. Maybe Denis will do one me, one Denis. So Denis, you can take it from here.
So a couple of questions. This is mostly for people who are working on their first, interested in how it. They've already got a few papers about how it works in other fields, because there are actually quite differences there. The authorship order, this can be different from fields. Overall, across science, mostly the order of co-authors from most to least. So the first author is usually the main author, and then the second one, and so on. And there is one exception, which is that in a lot of fields, the final position goes to the senior author. So that is actually a prestigious place as well. You can also play with the corresponding author, which I also know that in certain fields is important. And that one you have also a little bit freedom to determine who it is. When determining order, intellectual contributions are more highly valued than mechanical ones. Let's give an example. Even though it's so important, if an RA does nothing more than run an experiment that has completely been conceptualized, programmed, analyzed by somebody else, they might not make it beyond the acknowledgement section. Whereas somebody who only puts in a day, but it's a very crucial contribution to say how you analyze the data, how you conceptualize the study, might make it on the paper. And that's what we mean with overall intellectual contributions are more highly valued than mechanical ones.
I would also add that especially at an early stage, it is never too early to discuss those issues with your supervisor on work that you're doing. It's something that I always speak to with my PhD students, or whoever I work with, about the author's contribution. For an early careers, like I think most of the people here today, being the first author is really important. Denis and I, now it doesn't really matter as much because we have enough first authorship. So this is something that you keep it in mind and have a frank discussions with whomever you need to have it. Some field it's just one person, in some field it might be 8 people. So just be cognizant of that and don't be shy about raising the issue with your supervisor.
One thing, yeah. This is a quote from I would say from quite a senior cognitive psychologist. who said, this is more once you go into the point where you're like leading a project and you've got multiple people and then you decide who goes on the paper. His quote was, always give the bastards more than they deserve.
Okay, yes.
It was a little bit of a cheeky quote, but what he was saying is that in the long run for your career, it pays off to be generous, because people will be generous towards you. If you're very strict about who makes it on your paper or not, people will have the same attitude towards you.
Also, when you're writing, what we recommend is that you have the target, the outlet, or the audience reviewers in mind. Don't have your supervisor. You're not writing for the supervisor. You're reading for the general audience, and it's always, as we mentioned at the beginning, it's draft, polish, feedback. So it is a long process. I tell my students that before we submit a paper, I think there were 20, 30, 40, many revisions, sometimes minor, sometimes major, sometimes there's bickering, sometimes it's more easy move, but there's always a process by which you polish the paper. And it can be daunting. At some point you say, okay, what can I do anymore? So this is something to bear in mind, that it always takes a long time and it always needs a bit more reflection and work than anticipated. Dennis, do you want to say something about this part?
No, just just to voice what you last said. It always takes longer than you anticipate, and especially for the first paper, that can say with some authority, in the sense that I've never met anybody in my life for whom the experience was opposite. The first paper is hell. It goes on forever. You think like, oh, I'll write this in a month, or you come up with sort of a planning in your head, like, oh, I'll write it in the next 3 weeks, and it turns out to be 4 months. That is the standard. Absolutely, yeah. The first one's a bitch, definitely.
Okay. So you can say something about choosing the journal.
Yeah. So this is a sort of an interesting one, in the sense that even if you've written your paper, your success can be determined up to a certain extent by making right choices about which journal you target. Everybody will tell you, and especially I have been in meetings where I've had like research admin people tell me that I should submit my stuff to Nature because it's better for the university. And they are, of course, completely clueless that how difficult it is to get a Nature article. If you submit everything to Nature, you're going to have a not a short and bitter career. It's really important that you think about like where do you send your paper off to have a decent shot at it. Of course, within the ones that you have a decent shot at it, don't be shy, aim for the best journal there. How do you determine that? One of the things I would also say is like talk to senior people, because they quite often have like a couple of decades experiences with journals, and they can also give valuable insights. But besides that, one of the ways in which you can think about this is consider journals that published works cited in your manuscript. If you notice that a decent segment of your manuscript is quoting papers of a certain journal, chances are that this is actually a good target for you to send it. Compare your manuscript against what is typically published in various journals. That could be for a certain number of things like topic, style of research, quality of contribution. If you're targeting a journal that typically publishes rather lengthy papers, you do not want to write a short paper for it, or the other way around as well. Consider who the editor or associate editors are. Normally that doesn't matter. If you are in a contentious area, you might not want to send it to your theoretical adversary. In certain fields that doesn't matter. Other fields they're a little bit more cutthroat, and they don't let each other publish their stuff. So that is a little bit that you want to take into account. If an editor at a journal that you wish to submit as an expert, you might want to consider citing that person's work. That quote might sound a little bit unsavory, but it can also just simply be construed as a courtesy. I would personally never be offended if somebody doesn't cite my own work, but I have heard of other people like annoyed editor letters who then have to point out that they were also active in that field. So you want to avoid that position, that movement.
I can attest that recently I got a paper rejected, what we call desk rejected, because the journal editor said, "Are you sure this is the right journal?" So it happens even to us and I think that the editor was right. It was not the right journal. So thinking carefully about where it should be considered, it's already a step forward. Especially in the early career, again, do consult with your supervisor to see where it is. So things that journal consider, it is how topical or current it is. Do you make a novel contribution, or is it just something that has been done before? There are issues, and that depends on the field. So some fields do not use statistics, so null hypothesis or things like that are not really relevant. But it might be if you are in a field where those issues arise. So making sure that there is null effect, hard to publish. So if you don't have an effect, basically, although that is changing, make sure you write as well as possible, clear. And second, you don't get bonus points for being pompous or being sophisticated writer. As it is most of the time, what we write is complex enough. Our job is to make it easy for the reader, to read and to follow and to understand the ideas that we want to express. And of course, we mentioned the fit with the journal. So those are the kind of sort of general framework that you need to work from. Denis, do you want to say something, or should I move forward?
I think we've got our first question in.
Oh, okay.
Oh yeah, the question is, in the case of a desk rejection, do we have evidence that the paper was exclusively rejected due to being inappropriate for the readership of that journal? I can say from my own experience, when I desk reject, or triage as it's often called, when I triage a paper, I will also always mention why. And sometimes this is the topic. Sometimes this is, for instance, for my specific journal, like desk reject, if the materials are not open access, when it's possible to be open access, and I will always mention the specific reason why.
I would also say that actually some journals, their desk reject rate is about 50%. So they would send you just a generic comment, it doesn't fit, and something of that nature, without really providing you with any deep insight. Take a deep breath and move on in most cases. We'll get into some possibilities what you can do, but this is a good question about the desk reject process, because it's really the editor or associate editor makes the decision, and it's really quick, which is good because you don't have to wait a long time, but it really doesn't contain anything that you can argue with or utilize, or to understand where you can improve your work. It's really like just a general sense of the editor that this is not the kind of work that I want to see in the journal. It doesn't fit, or because and this is another important issue, and especially during COVID time, that was an important issue. There's a lot of pressure about finding reviewers. So if a journal gets 2,000 papers and it needs to find at least 10,000 reviewers, because many will say no. Sometimes what editors and associate editors do say, look, this is a really borderline, even below borderline. I'm not going to bother trying to find reviewers for that. It will make my life easier. It will make their life easier. So I'm just going to desk reject it. So that's another issue.
Yeah, I think we got a raised hand. I assume that's somebody who wants to ask a question.
Yes.
Yeah. Hello, everyone.
Hello, Sim.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So based on the question that I just did, first of all, thank you very much. I got your points. I would like to ask you, so for example, when I got a desk rejection saying that your paper is not appropriate for the readership of this journal, does this mean that my paper does not make a contribution? I mean, this is something that I have not heard by them. But do they imply also that, but they are just polite, so they ignore this stuff?
So I'll answer two questions simultaneously. Christopher Hauser asked a question on the side which is easy. It doesn't matter if you use British English, whatever English, as long as the English is good. If there are any issues, that will be pointed out. No paper is rejected because of British or American English. We will get to that in a later point. So when we send a note to authors that their paper does not fit the journal, the audience, this is a polite way of sometimes saying, look, this is not either high quality enough, the topic might not be the one that we would like to see currently, this is not the kind of paper that we publish. So there could be different kinds of reasons behind it, why. The main thing is just to understand that it happens, that in fact, most journals are moving in that direction. As I mentioned, there's been a lot of pressures on reviewers. So expect to see a lot of desk rejections.
And it could really work in your, it's a weird way. Of course, yeah, of course you get rejected, right? I mean, the rejection is never cool. But having said that, they might save you time. So the thing is that to get published, the reviewers have to agree with you, but one of the main voices in that decision, whether or not you get published, is the editor, him or herself. If the editor at the first glance says, I don't got a good feeling about this, then you probably don't want that editor. Probably it will save you time. It's going to be difficult for the reviewers almost to convince the editor. So in that sense, it just saves you a lot of time. Just desk reject, and then if need be, 24 hours later, you could have submitted to another paper. So the rejection is sort of like it's a better outcome than sending something out. It's out for 3 months and then it comes back and it's a reject.
Hope that was helpful. Let us continue. So generally, editors want to publish works that will enhance the journal. So you probably all know about the impact factors, etc. Really, editors want to increase the impact factor, the prestige of the journal. They want to publish work that is good, that will be of interest to the readers, and to interest to readers that even beyond the usual readership. So that will be an issue. They might also have their own ideas about specific area or specific topics. I was part of Health Psychology, the journal, and when the journal editor changed, they changed the focus. Suddenly they wanted more clinical, more randomized controlled trial. So they might have some ideas about what precisely they want to see published, and it might change over time. So it's worth paying attention to those kind of issues when you are submitting the work. Denis.
Yeah. So one of the things we could say about about the process of preparing to submit a manuscript. So now you've written your paper, right? So one of the things you pay attention, first of all, review and follow the journal submission guidelines. That will save you time. Submission guidelines can be about format. It can also be about word counts. Like more and more we're seeing about that certain formats within the paper, and sometimes the paper allows multiple formats. Say the same journal has both a brief format and a full paper format. So make sure you're within those limits. Most journals require or invite a cover letter that explains why the author believes the manuscript is appropriate. This can be important for journals that do a lot of desk rejection. So if you do a lot of desk rejection, that will be very important. Whereas if you have, say, for instance, a journal that does it to a lesser extent, the editor will probably look at the paper itself, and then automatically the paper will be more important than whatever you come up with in the cover letter. Cover letters can be for certain journals sort of a formality, which is sort of like a waste of time, where you just basically say, I think it's worthwhile. But if you are targeting a journal with a high desk rejection, it can make the difference between getting your paper in or not. So really think about like, what is it that this journal is looking, and what does my paper bring in? Any case, two things we would recommend. First of all, any conflict of interest, you have to declare it. A classic conflict of interest could be that you're doing something in the consultancy work for something else, where you have to make sure, like, look, I actually have a vested interest in this being published. It could be that if you introduce a piece of software and you will commercially exploit it, that there's another one, and so on. If you can, recommend 2 or 3 well-qualified, good reviewers. As a reviewer, the job of finding reviewers is very difficult. I will tell you straightforward, I will never, ever, if somebody recommends me 3 reviewers, I will never just bluntly take those 3 reviewers. It doesn't work like that. But if you recommend me 3, chances are I will get one of those 3, yeah? And at that moment, if you know these are good reviewers, they have to be independent from you, right? So sufficiently independent that can work in your advantage. You can also bar other reviewers from reviewing. We would recommend don't overdo it, only do it when you really, really have to. When there's somebody in the field that hates your guts or that is just being unfair. And I mean, scientists are like all other people. We do have the majority of us are pretty good people, but you do have the occasional person who you really want to strangle. Yes, you can put it in and just go like, you make a comment saying something like, we would respectfully ask to bar this person from reviewing due to unfair comments in the past. It is possible. I will say it out, it will say straightforward. It's actually quite rare to get it as an editor, those comments, but it does happen and I would typically take it into account.
Yeah, I've never seen anybody ask me to bar somebody. I only got recommendations so far.
Yeah, I've had it.
Okay. Just to give you a sense of what happens, typically you submit the paper. It goes to some admin person who makes sure all things are correct. Typically, depending on the journal, it's either the editor will assign it to associate editor, who will, so in my case, my editor receives it, so the editorial assistant receives it, the editor receives it, and then he does not read the papers unless he handles them, but in my case, it's a he. He sends it to the associate editor, so he will send me the paper and say, look, Yaniv, here's a paper, deal with it. And what I do is I glance at the letter. I don't really care about the letter, to be honest. In my case, I don't care about the letter because I read the papers. And I would go over and make sure, to answer one of the questions that was there, somewhat answer it. I really care if the language. So are there grammatical mistakes? Are there any editorial issues? So are the tables and everything are proper, etc. So I would make sure that there are no issues to do with. So if my journal has 35 pages, don't submit a 50-page article because I would desk reject it. So once I go over and make sure that I think the paper has a chance, that there's a point in sending to reviewers, I will ask, typically I ask 2 or 3 reviewers to examine the paper. I can say that the process can be daunting. During the pandemic, there were times that I made it to 15 people and nobody was willing to read the paper. Possibly people were too stressed or whatever. So it can be a daunting task to us. Sometimes getting people to review the process, which makes also the process. So you were wondering, why is it taking so long? Because sometimes if it takes me 15 individuals to approach them, I don't do it all at the same time. It comes one after the other. So it might take a period of time until somebody gets to me.
Oh, I think we've got somebody who.
Yeah, if you can make sure that you're on mute, thank you very much. So maybe you can say some words now, Denis, please.
Yeah, yeah. So what happens then is that you get, so same thing for me, like my editor will briefly glance at it. Our journal's got 8 associate editors, so then it will get sent to me. I try to find reviews for it. What happens then is those reviewer gets it. So what Yaniv was also saying, like, this could be a long process. So imagine like before you have to sort of like approach a journal that this process is taking too long, be aware that a lot of it could be like the editor waiting to hear back from a reviewer. Some reviewers are good that they will say yes or no, but even the reviewers say no, thank you for at least saying that. We do have people who completely ignore our emails. Maybe they go to spam folder, who knows. But then you have to wait for like a week of them to reply. If they haven't replied in a week, you go like, oh, I'll probably invite somebody else. And that really, you lose a lot of time that way. And that isn't nobody's fault. I mean, it's courtesy of the reviewer to hit the no button, but in principle, what can you do? They're all unpaid, so they're all volunteers, so you can't really be angry, right? Then reviewers evaluate the manuscripts, they make a recommendation with regards to the publication and suggestions for improvements, send it to the editor. In certain fields, reviewers typically sign. In other fields, typically reviewers are blind. And I think the majority is actually blind and going towards more and more blind, I would say, as the years go by. Keep in mind, reviewers are not paid. Most of them do a good job. I would say, like, it's actually shocking because these are really busy people often. They do it on the side. My review work is quite often stuff I do in the weekend, to be honest. Those are literally people, some people give away a couple of hours they can spend with their kids in the weekend. So it really is like something we have to be grateful for when you do it. Most of them do a good job. Some of them are super slow. And then some of them are downright annoying, where you say, for instance, the one thing I really don't appreciate from a reviewer is if they review a paper and then say no to reviewing the revision. That's not cool, because that as an offer, that means that your paper the revision will be read by somebody new, and they always find new things. That's the one thing I get annoyed with. But normally we owe reviewers an incredible amount of gratitude for their unpaid labor. But some of them are tardy, and some of them are flawed, and some of them their use of language is basically unprofessional. And then as an editor, you do have to step in a little bit and to tone it down a bit. Yeah. But most of them are good. You get a recommendation that typically falls in these categories. The accept as is, that's a rare one. I've had one this year that is basically change these 5 things and then it's accepted, and that's the closest I've had. And even that, strictly speaking, is not an accept as is, because they have to do a revision. Very rare. So it's minor revisions is normally the best you can get. The best you can get. The accept as is the equivalent of the hole-in-one in golf. Like, you have one in your career, but yeah, don't break your head around it. And the second one is reject but invite resubmission with substantive changes. Usually that means that it's re-reviewed. Quite often the editor will say it already in advance, like it will be re-reviewed. Sometimes he or she will say it will depend on the quality. I will decide then whether or not I send it back to the reviewers or not. If they say I will not send it back to the reviewers, that means that you have to do your very best on the revision, because it could be that the editor just accepts at that moment, and that saves you time. And then finally, of course, the rejection without invitation to resubmit. That is the same as the desk reject, but it costed you a couple of months. So that's the one you don't want. Always hope for minor revisions. Be ready for big. That's I think that's what I would say.
And just a reminder that the most common is reject without invitation to resubmit. So that's the default option. Be ready for that, and anything else, celebrate. Yeah. So just so you're aware. So once this process is on, the editor will send you a letter with the decision and the reviews, depending on the editor. Sometimes he or she will add their own comments if they're expert and they know in the field. Sometimes they will just add generic thing and summarize what the reviewer said. So if you have a minor revision, etc., you can start celebrating. It's really important that in the revision process, you really make a lot of effort to address all the points. My experience is that usually when I get a paper back, it's overwhelming. It looks like how I'm going to do it. But you can, and you always will. And it's also okay sometimes to say, look, we appreciate the reviewer's comment, but we cannot do it for the following reason, or we appreciate the reviewer comment, but this goes against X and Y and Z. Reviewers are also wrong at times. So while in the majority of cases, it is expected that you will respond to everything, it is okay to respond by saying that this is a mistake, this is not accurate. I've had comments like that from authors about when I was a reviewer, and I saw that also as an associate editor. So if you cannot revise, decide whether to revise for submission elsewhere. And sometimes because he or she might ask you to run more experiments or to do things that really stand against your, maybe it will change the paper in a way that you don't believe that it should be changed. I would typically consult with my co-authors and decide what to do. I am yet to not to try to revise a paper. So I've never decided not to revise and send it somewhere else. I do not know if Denis had that experience.
I think, yeah, once where they asked like for a big experiment, I said like that would be way too much effort. I've had it once. We've got one question here where somebody says, can I send several journals at the same time? That's a clear answer. The answer is no, you can't.
Actually, it's more complicated than that. It depends on the field. To my understanding, if you are in law can send it to different journals. But you should consult it. So Denis and I work somewhat in related field. In our fields, it's a big no-no because it's most likely it is a possibility that it will land at the same reviewers, and if it does, your paper will be rejected immediately from both of them without.
I've had it happen where I was a reviewer and I got the same paper whilst it was still being dealt with in another journal, and that was an email straight to both editors in chiefs, and it was rejected within the same day for both papers with an email saying like this is inappropriate.
Denis, your turn, but we might want to move a bit fast because it's already 40 to give some time for more questions to come in case they can.
So I think we mentioned a lot of it already. So the our positive message is expect rejection, hope to get invitation to revise and resubmit, because the major revision is already like a step in, and you got it automatically also means you got a fighting chance to actually get it accepted. Study the action letter and the reviews. Work hard, take time, be savvy in making revisions. Try to give to the reviewers what they want. Reviewers also are not always consistent with each other. If that's the case, you need to point that out. And it is acceptable to deny a request from a reviewer by pointing out that another reviewer asked for the complete opposite. Actually, that's sometimes your leave jail for free card. If one reviewer says, please add a substantive part extra describing this literature, but reviewer B is slapping you on the wrist that your paper is too long, you just basically say, I'm not going to add that extra bit. Reviewer B was already complaining that the paper is too long. A good suggestion. This goes for anything, right? Whether or not you're a student or at least have others proofread your revised manuscript. This also is good for language issues, and keep in mind for the people in the room, neither Yaniv nor me, our native languages are not English. We worked on it. It helped to be in other places. It helps a lot if you are in a country where they speak English, and I think everybody in the room, in the virtual room, will be doing that exactly. But it is something that if I as an editor get a paper and I have difficulty understanding the language, I can't send it out to review, because reviewers, they would just say no when they would look at the abstract, see that I can't make heads or tails of the abstract, and I say no, I won't even be able to get reviewers to say yes.
So to Mario's question, what about sending more than one paper? Send 100 if you have. If you have 100 to send, it's possible. So the most I had in the same journal at the same time is 3. 2 have been rejected recently. The last one is still pending decision, but
no problem.
Don't overdo it. So it's unlikely that, but there's no issues with sending more than one. If you have 20 in the same journal, that first, it's impressive, and second, I think it might be overdoing it. So 2, 3 in a like, that's not a problem. What if you get the Denis, were you done? Sorry.
Yeah, go for it. No,
okay.
I think I mentioned that.
So what happens when you get a letter and you feel that the editor and the reviewers are completely wrong, and they don't know what they're talking about, and they made mistakes, etc. And it happens. We are humans. First thing, what you do is take a deep breath, take a day or two, simmer, think about it. I have received letters like that. Denis has received letters like that, and I have contested the decision of an editor. I sent back a polite letter like you do in revision. I said, "Dear editor, thank you for the letter. We understand the reviewer point of view. However, we would like you to reconsider for the following point." And we took the editor point by point why we believed that our paper does not make the mistake, why we can address the issues. I think I have tried it maybe 10 or so times with about 30 to 40% success. And every time that we did it, actually the paper was published eventually. So it is acceptable. You just have to be polite, you have to be kind, and you have to realize that the chances are slim, but there are some, and you have to be selective when you do that. So you cannot just bombard the editors with, what are you doing? I cannot understand. You have to be.
It helps if, well, what I would say is that you can't attack them on their interpretation. But you can suggest that they might have gotten something wrong, a factual thing. And then as an editor, I can go like, I've had it where I go like, oh yeah, that's right. And then you allow them again. But if it's on the interpretation where you go like, oh, I thought the 2 reviews were not as negative as you make them out, then that's not going to go. That's not going to go. And there's a question from Kate Willoughby. I think she's in my department. The question is, what about sending a set of papers that are linked? That is actually quite rare. It's rare where you have like 2 pieces of work that are obviously strong enough to stand by itself, and you want to submit them, say, for instance, at the same time to the same journal. I would drop an email to the editor-in-chief about their policy about linked papers on that one, because it doesn't happen that much. And it could be that they will say, oh, you need to do one and then the second one, or they could say, they go like, okay, let's have both of them at the same time. And we deal them with the same editor and even the same reviewers if need be. So it's possible. I would check with the journal because it's relatively rare. It's relatively rare.
So we have 2 more slides. It takes. We apologize because it takes a bit longer than we anticipated. So Denis, you can give your swan song, and I'll do the last slide.
Yep. Always. Yeah, this is true. Although it's getting slightly better. The lag between initial submission and journal publication is rarely less than a year, often 2 or more. It can be a lengthy process, so don't get too frustrated. It's normal that it takes a time. What's changing now is that the what used to be publication we referred to when it arrived in the library. Now we do have online publication, so actually the lag is reduced between when it's accepted and when people can download the website. However, the review process itself, editors, journals have always tried to reduce the amount of time they give to reviewers for reviewing it because they want to portray themselves as a fast journal. I do not have the impression it's so much faster than it was 10 years ago. I get the idea that it still takes forever. In most fields, it's unethical. Now I have to say most because somebody pointed out an exception. Unethical to submit to more than 1 journal at a time. Why is that? Well, reviewer time is a precious commodity. Like I said, these are like really good people who give up their weekends and stuff like that. If you were to send it to 2 journals, if you get one of the same journal, you're in deep one of the same reviewers, you're in deep shit because you got caught out. However, if they're different people and then only it gets accepted in 1 journal, you wasted all the other people's time. And then there is another reviewer that will then say no to another paper because they've just reviewed the paper for that journal and so on. So please don't do it. If the moment your paper gets rejected, you are free to do with it whatever you want in terms of submitting it to another journal. It's usually unwise to submit to a different journal without any revisions. So if you're in certain fields, the chances are you might get one of the reviewers again. If that reviewer has sacrificed their part of their weekend to give comments on your paper, and you just basically said, I'm going to ignore anything that person said and just submit the same thing, that's the same thing as saying to that reviewer, I don't think there was much merit in your comments. So that reviewer is now pissed off. So it's not like a review process. You don't have to do everything they ask, absolutely not. But if you see really good comments of a reviewer, please do it. Please do it, because if you get the same reviewer, if they see you've taken certain things into account, you're on the positive side. Otherwise, you really are on the negative side. And then finally, when it does get accepted, you are typically required to sign over your copyright to the publisher. That's the one thing that is super fast in the publication process, is that the second it gets accepted, it's like 2 hours later you get an email to take away your copyrights. The alternative nowadays is a lot of journals are open access. At that moment, the copyright does not apply, but then typically you have to pay a fee to get it published. Most journals allow authors who transfer copyrights to post a final accepted version. That's the Microsoft Word version typically. It's not in the journal layout, on their own website and their institution websites. So that's what typically you are able to do that.
Okay, and some just general comments. Collaboration has been and is the key to success, to academic success. So I would highly encourage you to find collaboration either with your peers, that is, if you're a PhD student with a PhD student, if you are a postdoc with other postdocs. The more you do, the more it works. Work on writing, speaking, etc., and do all of the above. I want to add one thing that is not there, and I would actually put the slides down. Imagine when you're reading a paper, what's the number one thing that you read? Probably it is the abstract. I would invest the most, comparatively speaking, time on polishing the abstract. The better the abstract, the more concise, the more alluring, the more exciting the abstract is, the more you have a chance that the paper will actually go to review, and that reader in the future will be interested in the paper. So people sometimes neglect to invest time and think, okay, abstract, I'll do just something. On the contrary, invest as much time as you can on polishing and having a high quality abstract on that. And I will just give Denis the last words here, and then we'll open the...
Yep, about the abstract is that you've got the tendency to write it first, right? Because it's on the first page. There's the best abstract you can write when you've just finished the paper, because then it's really in your fingers about like what you found, how you do it, how you interpret it. Quite often when you write the first version of the abstract, your vision changes, the words you use, the fluency, the line of thought is at its best after you finish the paper. So it could be actually, what I typically do is, but it depends on field, I write the results section first. So all the analysis, I'll write the introduction, then I write the discussion, and the last thing I write is the abstract, when it's really in my fingers about what I've got. But okay. That might be different for other people.
So first, we'd like to thank all of you for joining us today. We hope, Denis and I hope that we were able to give you some information that you might not have known and might help you in your academic career in writing. Now we'll open, I'm happy to stay a bit longer. If there are questions, we are happy to answer questions. If you have on anything to do with the publishing process, with the writing process. So, okay, thank you, Pavel. Any questions? Maybe you are more than welcome, Malak. Thank you, Marius.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Matthew.
Hello, Yaniv. Can I ask a question?
Yes, of course, of course. I didn't see that there was a hand. Sorry.
No problem. Because I enjoyed the most of the session, the presentation, and you gave some experiences and examples from your expertise. And I'm just wondering, if we got test rejection from one journal, like a 3-star, and we want to rush to the next a new 3-star journal, because we didn't receive anything from that journal, seeing that you probably find a new, more appropriate areas. When we find a new journal to target and to submit in a quick time, do we just, to which I did was just add some references, cite some papers from that new journal we are targeting. Is that enough? Like just to add citations throughout the text, or any other, amendments should I do?
That is a good question, because typically when you get a desk reject, you do not know what is missing, where you could have improved.
Yeah.
Aside from banging my head on the wall and being really upset with the editor for rejecting my brilliancy, how dare they? Typically, when I get a desk reject, I typically go and think, where should I submit it somewhere else? And sometimes I make minor changes, but in most cases I do not make a lot of changes, because I do not know where I could have. Because if I knew a priori beforehand what I could have done better, I probably would.